Everyone. Welcome to week 2 of Management 36045, Principles of Logistics Management. This week's lecture is going to focus on Chapter 4, which is Procurement from your text. So, when we start out and we're looking at procurement, um, what is procurement? Procurement is a strategic activity of any firm in the contemporary business environment. And really, there's multiple factors that have elevated the place of procurement, the criticality of the procurement function within the firm. When you look at the cost of goods sold or the cost of services provided, purchase goods and purchase services are really among the largest cost elements of the cost of goods sold or the cost of services provided for an organization. And obviously, if I think once I read a Boothroyd Dewhurst study that said that purchase goods amount for over 50% of the cost of goods sold. So if something's amounting for half of the cost of goods sold, everyone always focuses on lowering the cost of labor. Well, if labor, I think historically amounts 10, 15, maybe 20%, but the cost of purchased goods and purchased services could be, is historically 50%, if not higher. So when you consider that the cost of the purchased goods are 50% and the cost of labor is 10 to 20%, you're obviously going to make much more of an impact on lowering your cost of goods sold through the procurement function and through trying to lower the cost of goods and services. So because of this, that there is a growing emphasis on outsourcing. Items that were made in-house are now being made out of house. Something to consider with this is, what is your organization's core competency? That's a big term when you look at outsourcing. Companies want to do what is their core competency, and they want to outsource what's not their core competency. A great example of this is, Henry Ford always strived to be vertically integrated. Now today, Ford Motor Company they assemble cars. They are a firm that designs and assembles cars. They do some component manufacturing, but the bulk of their components, the steering systems, the seats, the electronics, the wheels, as in the tires and the rims, those are all outsourced. Well, a great example of this is now Ford buys all their tires from Goodyear or Firestone or Pirelli. They buy them from somewhere. Well, at one point in time, Henry Ford purchased tens of thousands of acres of rainforest in South America with the desire to have a rubber plantation so that he could manufacture his own tires and drive cost out of his cars, drive cost out of his product. And what happened was, he invested millions upon millions of dollars in buying this land, building housing for workers, relocating workers, relocating leadership to that region, building a port, building an airstrip, building manufacturing facilities for tires, all to find out that it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't economically feasible. And as a result, Ford lost tens of millions of dollars. And they ended up buying the tires from Goodyear or Firestone, the same people they'd been buying them from previously, and still do to this day. So, you look at that. Should Ford have insourced their tires? Obviously, no, it didn't work. Making tires, farming rubber, harvesting rubber, is not Ford's core competency, but it is Goodyear's core competency. So, you want to outsource to someone that can do it more effectively, more efficiently, more cost beneficially than you can. So because of this, because of outsourcing, so outsourcing is really when you move anything outside of your house. Uh, I think automatically a lot of people are going to say outsourcing, and they're going to think of China, Mexico, India, Vietnam. Um, that's offshoring. So when you outsource, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be outsourcing. When you move something to a different country, to a different location geographically. That's offshoring. So in theory, Ford could move the production of the F-150 for all the world to Brazil, and that is offshoring. It's not outsourcing because they moved it to another one of their facilities, but it is offshoring. So not all outsourcing is offshoring, and not all offshoring is outsourcing. Yeah, it's a topic I love to talk about, especially when we get into right shoring. And right shoring is really understanding what should we make in house, what should we make out of house, what should we buy from U.S. based manufacturers, what should we, or I guess local based manufacturers, and what should we buy from international based manufacturers. And then you even get into the question of, do you buy it from a developed Western region? Do you buy it from a um, we'll say stabilized Eastern region such as China, um, or even India to an extent, or do we buy it from an emerging low cost region? And these emerging low cost regions, Malaysia, Burma, Vietnam, they're really the next wave of low cost regions of supply. They are what China was to 20 or 30 years ago. So purchasing historically has been perceived as just a buying function. We're buying what manufacturing needs. We're buying what operations needs. We're just buying. They tell us to go buying. It's no different than you go grocery shopping. You get a list and you go shopping. In this function, the purchasing agent try to get the lowest price possible with the minimal acceptable quality. It was really a transactional or a tactical focus, and it led to getting the best possible deal. It didn't focus on the future. It didn't focus on the relationships or how you can leverage your buying history and your relationships for the best overall value for your organization. There was no concept of supply chain, so there was no such thing as the end to end. From the very raw material to the very satisfied customer, there was no concept of the supply chain, of the value chain. Purchasing very seldom looked beyond their first tier supplier. They didn't want to know, how the meat was made, so to speak. When someone goes to buy meat at the grocery store, they don't want to know how it got to be in that nice package. To me and you, the grocery store, Kroger or Walmart, um, they are the first tier supplier to us, and oftentimes we don't think about what happened before that. Was the beef organically raised? Was the beef free range, or was it kept in a pen? Was it humanely treated? What was it, Black Angus? Was it Hereford? I mean, and that was, and now as a culture, we do look at that. We do want to know where our food came from, and just like our buying habits and manufacturing, procurement agents, purchasing agents did not necessarily care where it came from beyond the first tier. They just wanted to get it and get it at the time they want it, at the price they want it. Purchasing was simply responding to the demands of production. Um, you know, and that was purchasing, and purchasing slowly became more important, and as it became more important, it became more procurement. And procurement is a organizational capability. It ensures that the firm is positioned to implement its strategies with support from its base. Procurement looks up and down the entire supply chain, and looks for what opportunities are there to bring positive impact, but also what opportunities are there to reduce negative impact. Can we save money? So if you think about sales versus procurement, if the salesperson goes out and sells $10 million more in revenue every year, and it's a 10% profit, that's $1 million in extra profit for the company every year. But if the procurement person goes out and saves $10 million in cost of goods sold, it's a $10 million addition to profit. So a lot of this discovery, a lot of this realization really led to procurement having a much more prominent seat at the table. Procurement focuses on building relationships with suppliers. Procurement looks both ways. You're looking downstream at the customers, and you're looking upstream at your suppliers, and really understanding, what does my supplier have that my customer may need? What does my customer need or want, and can my suppliers provide that? and really you're acting as a conduit for balance for your organization. And procurement has a heavy involvement in outsourcing. And remember, not all outsourcing is offshoring, not all offshoring is outsourcing, but there is a right sourcing. And that right sourcing really is what procurement does. Are we buying the right things in the right quantities at the right time for the right price from the right suppliers? And if you find out that one of those rights is not correct, um, you really need to understand, do we need to find some alternate sources for these manufactured products or services? Procurement is going to focus on several issues that are within the firm's supply base. We need to make sure that there's a continuous supply. If your company does not get the product that it needs to make its end product, it halts all revenue. I once explained to a supplier that was constantly late shipping me. I had to explain to them, when you do not ship me product, I do not manufacture faucets. And when I do not manufacture faucets, I don't have a need to schedule my hourly workforce. Well, when I don't have the work to keep my hourly workforce busy, I'm not going to bring them in and pay them to not generate product that generates revenue. So as a result, without having continuous supply, not only was my company unable to generate revenue, but the hourly workforce was unable to generate revenue. So it's much more than, am I supplying the part that my company needs? And am I providing what is needed for the hourly workforce to earn a living? We want to optimize the inventory investment. Oftentimes people will say we want to minimize the inventory investment. I like to look at it as, we're minimizing the negative inventory investment. You want to make sure that you're investing in inventory that is going to generate revenue. It's going to generate innovation. You don't want to put your company's financial resources in product that is not turning. We want to make sure that we have a constant quality improvement within supply. So it's very critical that procurement is very closely aligned with quality control, with the quality department, and making sure that the suppliers, a lot of firms I've worked in have called it the RPPM or the DPPM, and that stands for rejected parts per million or defective parts per million. And it varies on industry. Typically in the consumer goods industry, such as someone making faucets or maybe someone making blenders, it could be as high as 2,500 to 5,000 RPPM or DPPM. However, in the automotive industry, obviously much more safety critical, I believe Honda and Toyota are famous, Ford also, for having 0 RPPM, 0 rejected parts per million. So what that is saying is that every part that comes into a Ford plant, a Honda plant, a Toyota plant from their suppliers has to be perfect. I'm not saying that other automotive manufacturers don't require that. Those are just the 3 that came off the top of my head. So not telling anyone that Mercedes has lesser quality controls or GM has lesser quality controls than Ford, Toyota, or Honda. Those are just ones that came off the top of my head. So um, procurement also wants to understand and proactively develop their suppliers. So are we having a strategic supplier selection? Do we have a bid list of who we will bid to? Do we have a list of who is preferred to give business to? Do we have a list of who we shouldn't give business to? And through this strategic supplier development, we're also building supplier relationships. We're working with our suppliers so they continuously improve. We could know that we are growing a certain segment of our business. I think a great example of that is um, Apple. When they started getting into AirPods, they knew that they had to have a supplier that could make those. I think one of Apple's biggest third-party contract manufacturers is a company called Foxconn, and good, bad, or indifferent, Foxconn has had some issues. Actually, some terrible issues, and I believe they resolved many of them. But one thing you want to consider is that, let's say you're the procurement person at Apple. You know that you have this new technology that you need to take advantage of the market in the future. You need to go to Foxconn, to your other suppliers as early as possible. Do you, and if you have a strategic and transparent and trusting partnership, not just a relationship, a partnership with these suppliers, you can go to them and say, you know, do you have this ability? Okay, you do. How is it? We need to improve it. You don't. We need to help you develop it. And then you want to look at, and all these things roll into the lowest total cost of ownership. Because if you have a supplier that's shipping you quality parts all the time, it's going to be a lower total cost. If you have a supplier that you trust, that you have a great relationship with, that you select them and there's no doubts and it's a seamless process, you have a lower total cost. Um, so when we look at some of the major categories for components of total cost of ownership, we have the pre-transaction, then there's the during transaction and the post-transaction, and these are pretty self-explanatory. The pre-transaction cost, it's the costs that lead up to the actual transaction. So it's the development, it's qualification, it's educating the supplier on the firm, it's educating the firm on the supplier. And then you start to look at some of the transactional components. What's the price, the cost to place the order, the cost of delivery and receiving? Are there tariffs? What's the shipping? Are there inspection? Do we return? Is there a follow-up? And then the post-transaction is, was there a quality? Was there a defect that caused a recall or caused a line down or caused a failure of goods? And is there any ongoing need for replacements or repairs or maintenance? It's pretty self-explanatory, but there is a good chart in the book if anyone has any questions on that. Within the procurement function, as we've moved more from a tactical purchasing to a strategic procurement, the need for procurement strategies is becoming more and more important. And one of the biggest procurement strategies, so I think, there's procurement strategies, and these are strategies that you're going to use to operate your procurement department. And then there's category strategies, and there's strategies that you use to um, guide your category over a 3 to 5 year period to meet ultimate goals. But the number one procurement strategy that most people are going to identify and most people are going to understand is that insourcing versus outsourcing, offshoring versus onshoring, the make versus buy decision. This is, it's not as simple as I can make part X for $5, but I can buy it for $4. If you look at it just on that unilateral comparison, you're going to say, I'm going to buy it. But then when you consider when you make the part, it's $5. But when you take it out, then your variable overhead does not necessarily matter because it is variable overhead, but your fixed overhead has to be spread out against other parts. And then you start to look at that entire equation. And it could be that while your buy price is lower, your buy cost is higher because you have to look at how it's going to affect your total book of business. You also want to look at, some of these alternative procurement strategies, such as having the user buy. So it can be an example of, we could be contracting. I could work for General Motors, and I could be contracting with a division of produce something for me. And I know that at GM, I can purchase O-rings much better than Bosch can. And we could have the user buy the parts under our contract pricing. You may want to look at supplier operational integration. So you can actually integrate your supplier's operations into yours and fully leverage your suppliers. This is, I think, really common in indirect procurement and MRO and storeroom management. And then value management, which extends beyond the buyer-seller operations. So this involves engineering. You may have heard the term VAVE, which stands for value add value engineering. And really, it's getting your suppliers, your trusted partners, involved early in the product design and getting their input and understanding. If we design it this way, it might cost X, but if we make these changes, we don't sacrifice performance, but we can lower costs because then all of a sudden it becomes easier. It becomes more cost efficient for your supplier to manufacture. And they'll pass some of those cost savings on to you because you can reduce complexity, you can reduce subcomponents, you can reduce the goods that go into it as well as the labor that goes into it. Also, so when you start to look at supplier selection, we talked about that a little earlier, and in supplier selection and assessment, um, there has to be a lot of homework done in supplier selection. You have to make sure that you're selecting a good trade partner. And oftentimes with a new supply partner, with a new trade partner, you want to give them one job, one part to develop on, one part to prove themselves on. You don't want to give a brand new supplier uh, a large share of business. They may not be able to handle the onboarding. It could be damaging to your business if they fail. So oftentimes a good strategy for supplier selection for a new supplier is to dual source. So you could have a very large volume part such as a bolt that you're using to mount an axle to a car if you're Ford Motor Company, and you could buy those millions and millions and millions of bolts from company A, and you could give 25% of that volume to company B, and as they prove themselves that they make a quality, reliable automotive fastener, that you could start to give them more and more business. So part of this supplier selection process really stems down to you identify a supplier and you start to evaluate them, you start to assess them. You conduct audits. Typically, these audits are multi-day, and they look at everything from the facilities to the equipment records to the maintenance records to what are your processes, what are your process controls, do you have documentation of you following your processes, looking at the financials of the suppliers to make sure they're not at a risk to go out of business, and then even interviewing other customers, interviewing bank references and their suppliers to understand is their business sound, are their processes sound. Um, Typically, these would take place in person. So I think that a lot of companies are hesitant to add new suppliers right now because it is difficult to conduct these audits. Also, you know, there as you onload a new supplier, you select a new supplier, you're going to monitor their performance. You may be stricter with them as they're on a probation period. And then once they get through that probation period, once they start to become eligible to have more and more business awarded to them, you may certify the supplier or give them the status of a strategic or a pre-approved supplier for business going forward. Um, so another trend is the e-commerce function within procurement. So oftentimes when I say e-commerce, students will think, oh, are our companies buying from Amazon? No, typically we aren't buying many things from Amazon. There's no control, and like we talked about, you want to know what's beyond the first tier of your supply base. You have no way of knowing that when you purchase components, goods, or services on Amazon. But e-commerce and procurement, and I know you've probably heard the buzzword blockchain, but the most common e-commerce within procurement is the use of EDI, which stands for Electronic Data Interchange. So this is an electronic transmission of data between the firm and its suppliers. Oftentimes, my ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning System, and your ERP will link together. There will be a link between my procurement function and your sales function, and I send an order to your company. And through the EDI, it actually links right into your sales function. And through the EDI, I send an order, you receive an order, you acknowledge an order, and then on your side, you take that order and it goes into your manufacturing queue. And it starts to queue up your demand to buy the parts needed to make my order. It starts to put me on the schedule or notify the scheduler. So gone are the days of the buyer or the procurement agent at company 123 printing out an order and faxing it to their supplier, or you know sending it as a PDF, or really, to show my age, physically mailing it. I think early in my career, I say that as I started working in manufacturing when I was 15, we would actually mail purchase orders occasionally. So, then there are the use of internet based communication. So Oftentimes, this is going to be more common in indirect procurement. At indirect procurement, you may use an electronic catalog or a punch-out site to order parts. You may use that for indirect procurement because indirect procurement is often lower rated criticality to the final good. It's often less regulated. But also an e-commerce aspect that could be considered is the use of e-auctions. Oftentimes, and I've done this in my careers, if I have a package I need, or if I'm building a piece of equipment, and I have multiple sources, I will actually conduct an e-auction. I will put my specifications, and the specifications will be available for 2 months, and suppliers can bid against each other with their best price, and we can use that to narrow it down to one or two suppliers to help make our sourcing decision. So one thing you do want to consider when you're looking at a supplier is what is their logistics ability? How can their logistics interface with you as procurement? Um, and then also you need to know how you as procurement can interface with your logistics. So in this case, the procurement department, their colleagues inside their company are going to be the inbound logistics, and the logistics individuals at the selling organization are going to be the outbound logistics. So a very key term to know in logistics, if you're working in procurement or even if you're working in logistics and you work with procurement, is just-in-time inventory. So oftentimes it'll be abbreviated as JIT. This is a lean, capital LEAN, from the Toyota production system. This is a core tenement of that. Um, you know, you get more frequent deliveries on smaller quantities, and there's close cooperation and communication. So automotive relies heavily on this because if you think about an automotive, oftentimes the components that are being used in assembly at Ford are big and bulky. Um, and a lot of their key suppliers are going to have warehouses near the Ford assembly plant. And every morning, and oftentimes every shift, a truck is going to arrive and it's going to offload what Ford needs to assemble the Ford Mustang for that next 8-hour shift. And then at the end of that shift, another truck will come with 8 hours worth of inventory. And what this allows is this allows Ford to use their square footage to manufacture and assemble automobiles. Ford's core competency is not storing parts, it is making cars. And this allows Ford to generate as much revenue per square footage of their factory as they can. Um, also with procurement, you will work with the procurement of logistics services. You will work with performance-based logistics as a way to measure your suppliers' performances and hopefully negotiate the best rates possible for your organization. So when you start to look at the procurement of logistics services, overall, procurement is a highly transferable skill. If you know how to negotiate, if you know how to manage spend, if you know how to manage supplier relationships, all you then have to do is learn the specifics of, am I buying machines? Am I buying plastic parts? Am I buying logistics services? Am I buying marketing time? So then you just learn the specifics of your category. I mean, there are going to be some nuances. It's not quite as simple as I stated there, but it is a highly transferable skill. So many firms are using what's known as a for-hire carrier. So these carriers are used for, I guess, what we'd call non-routine movements. You can use a broker to arrange them if you're a smaller organization, or you can use your own in-house people if you are a large and you have a large amount of spend, and you can sway the carriers. Um, it's not uncommon for smaller firms to use a broker or use a transportation exchange. Uh, So non-routine is going to be maybe have a random shipment of I just bought a new fork truck and I have to have that shipped to me. But also some of these for hire carriers are going to be used for routine movements. And this, like I said, with the just-in-time inventory, you may get a shipment every single day from a supplier, and that's going to be a routine supplier movement or a routine delivery. It's often that also a firm is going to hire a for-hire warehouse. And these are public warehouses that are used for routine storage and handling. So those same companies that maybe are shipping to Ford 3 times a day, let's say Robert Bosch, I used to work for them, so I'll cite them. They make steering systems, and they would have to deliver steering systems every day to their customer plants. Well, Robert Bosch Steering Systems is in Cincinnati, Ohio. Um, they provide the steering system for the BMW M Class. The BMW M Class is made in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Well, it's awfully difficult to ship every single day from Cincinnati, Ohio to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and make sure that that delivery is there every single day, especially when the delivery is less than a semi load. So in this case, Robert Bosch may hire a warehouse in Spartanburg or maybe within an hour where they will take large volumes down, maybe a week or two at a time. Because remember, you don't want to take a month down or 6 months down at a time because then you're paying for that space. So you may take a week down at a time, and then you have a local firm come every day and take the daily amount over to BMW. Um, Another way that this could be managed is BMW could have a third-party logistics service. And the third-party logistics company can manage a warehouse. Oftentimes they're doing freight invoicing and auditing, they're doing freight forwarding, they're negotiating rates for you because they are logistics experts. They are logistics buyers. They are the big player in logistics. But they can also work with for hire warehouses and help smooth that process. And really, a third party logistics provider can really make life easier for the buyer and the seller. So, we talked about some of those different segments, but who does the buying? So, many firms have a procurement department that buys direct materials. So, what direct materials? Direct materials are the goods that are used in making the part. Um, or they're the goods that go into the part. So if we look at, I feel like I've talked about cars a lot in this one. So if we look at a faucet, the direct material is going to be the O-rings, the tubing, the faucet handle, the spout, the spigot, the filters. The indirect material is going to be the cardboard box that it comes in. It's going to be the manufacturing line that it was used. It's going to be the gloves or the hairnet or the safety glasses that the assembly workers used. It's going to be the logistics and the transportation of the warehousing. Those are going to be indirect. Those are costs that are indirect to the product. Um, and I've worked in direct purchasing and I've worked in indirect purchasing. Both have great parts. Both have bad parts. I have a personal preference. If you're curious about direct versus indirect, reach out to me. It's a conversation I enjoy having. I will say that what I find to be intriguing is that in the European business climate, the indirect procurement role is the more desirable role over the direct procurement role. And in the US business climate, it is often seen as more desirable to be in direct procurement than to work in indirect procurement. Um, so, when you look at this, typically, most of the time, the person that's doing the buying, they're going to have the title of maybe a buyer or a purchasing agent or a procurement agent. And oftentimes you'll see the title of a category manager or a commodity manager, and they're more managing the relationships, managing the spend. And they'll have a strategy and they'll put a bid list together and they'll put an approved supplier list together. And then that list is utilized by a buyer or a procurement agent or a purchasing agent. So when you look at logistics as far as procurement, some firms completely outsource the procurement of their logistics, of their transportation, their warehousing to a 3PL service. And they do this because, like we go back to the example of Ford and the rubber plantation. Ford was not an expert in rubber, and most manufacturers are not experts in transportation. So they outsource it to a 3PL, and the 3PL gets them the best rates, has better processes, and really brings a lot of value to the table, often at a lower cost than Ford or BMW or General Electric could do by themselves. So when we, and some good examples of criteria when you're selecting a carrier, when you're looking at your logistics procurement, what's a competitive rate, and are we being charged a competitive rate, and how can we get it to be more competitive? What is the customer service? What are the metrics we're going to rate it on? Obviously, on-time delivery, product, uniformity of delivery. Is the package in one piece? Is the condition of the packaging appropriate? What's the transit time? Is that transit time always 3 days? Is it 3 days, 5 times out of 10? And is it one time, 1 day, one time, and the other four, it's anywhere from 7 to 20? What's the availability of equipment? So this would be capacity. So does the company have enough trucks? Do they have enough ships? Do they have enough planes to support you? Um, a general rule of thumb is if you're interviewing a new supplier, um, you never want your volume of business to take them over 85% capacity. Studies have shown that once you get over 85% capacity, that is when you need to start adding capacity. So I'm not saying don't go with a logistics provider if you go over 85% of their, if your business drives them over 85% of their capacity, but make sure you understand what their plan is to add capacity. Obviously, when you're purchasing logistics, the adding of capacity can vary. A trucking company can go out and buy a new truck and trailer and have them ready to start hauling your stuff within a week. Um, Air shipments, it might take a year to get a plane. Maybe you can buy a secondhand plane, but it's still, by the time you buy the plane, conduct all the inspections, conduct all the repairs, get the plane ready. I mean, minimum I'd say is 6 months to buy a secondhand plane. Maximum is 12 to 18 months to buy a new cargo liner. And then if it's a shipping company, you're talking years to buy a new ship. So you have to consider your mode of transport when you start looking at how much are you going to affect their capacity. And then what's the loss and damage rate? What's their track record? What's their claims process? Do they utilize electronic data interchange? Are they easy to do business with? Are they easy to conduct transactions with? What is their geographic coverage? So for example, you may need to ship parts from the Port of Hanover to the Port of Jacksonville, but you may also need to bring things from um, may need to bring things out of the port of Hong Kong, but also the port of Taiwan. Well, a carrier that is licensed to leave Hong Kong may not be able to go to China, may not be able to go to Taiwan. So you aren't going to be able to have a boat go from Hong Kong to Taiwan, pick up your product, and come here. It may be different carriers. So you really want to see, can a supplier cover all your geographic needs? And even if they can't cover your geographic needs, do they have partners? Are they part of a consortium that can provide for your needs? So how can your suppliers resolve problems? What is their track record? Talk to their customers, understand what and how they fix problems. Um, what is their insurance coverage? Are there gaps? Do you need to cover insurance? If so, how much? What's that do to the total cost proposition? And how accurately do they bill? Is every bill incorrect and you're going to spend more money fighting the bills than if you would have went with a slightly higher priced competitor? So those are just some high level things of the procurement function, how the procurement function aligns with logistics. I know I went a little longer today. I work in procurement. I deal with logistics as part of my job, so I enjoy the topic. But anytime you guys want to talk, I keep saying that one day maybe a student's going to want to have a conversation about this. But I look forward to your questions if you have them. And as always, do not hesitate to reach out if you need any support.